Hello, I am Friendly. I am one of the older SR players. I'm also currently the lead RMB RP moderator, and I am the creator of the God Mode 3D. That is basically the rule set of SR.
Yes, hello. I am Sika or Sardinania, and I also been around since shortly after SR was began. Not quite as long as Friendly has been around, but nearly. And I am also a RMB RP moderator. And yeah,
Alright, so SR, Strangereal, or how I usually pronounce it, Strangereal, is basically just a ARP world that unlike our forums counterpart eras, which only spans a continent, SR is basically an entire world, and we generally have there are differences, but overall there's just it's fun. Mm. Yes, I generally just like to pronounce it French, or at least how I think you would pronounce it in French. Well, generally, in the time before we created Strange World, there was just chaos, basically. On the RMB, there were Eras was basically unknown by a lot. No one really knew about the forums or how to get there or how anything works. So we were just RPing on the RMB, and essentially, it did work, but there were issues such as who are your neighbors, since there was no map. There was basically no idea who your neighbors were, who you bordered, how far you were from everyone. So eventually, we thought that it would be time to get a map so we would actually know where everyone is and how you are compared to others.
it was the original map was technically created by the team who created the game Ace Combat. However, for the SR map, which is based on the Ace Combat map, was created by Puxovska, who which this predates me, so this information would best be explained by Friendly as well.
Yes, SR was not actually the first web map we had. We originally started with a real world map. The problem with that, of course, was that people would claim nations that they liked, and which was mostly my fault since I claimed basically all of Europe, the US West Coast, and parts of Russia, which basically meant that no one could be in that area, which caused problems at first, which is why we eventually went into a different map that was slightly different, more regional, set in Asia, which was Necessary Era, I think, who made it. But for the same reasons, it didn't really work out. So eventually, Poxovska came around with the Strangereal map, and most of us didn't know the Ace Combat map, and it looked pretty nice. It looked pretty big. It looked spacious. It looked similar enough to Earth to be Earth, but still be different enough for people to pick their own spots, to make up their own thing, and eventually, Paxovska invited a couple of people. I joined, Sanada joined, uh, AKE joined, Nesiriara joined, Akara, Minthas, and other old OG people in those days. Well, technically yes and no. Officially, those maps are of course not canon, but given that people still hold their own nations, their own ideas, their own world building of things, a lot of things carried over. My nation, for one, is pretty much the same in all settings, only that names are different, settings are different, and all that kind of thing. So it really depends per nation. Yeah, basically that, because like I said, in those days we used a lot of real world maps, and because of the reason I explained before, that really didn't work out. So it would start over every time essentially. But some of the RP ideas that I mean, some of the RPs that happened in those days were technically still technically seen as canon. Like before I created the God mode 3D, a lot of things would just happen. People would take millions or billions of soldiers and they would just nuke each other to death and just reset button everything. And Nesseriera basically, for fun, stayed that way. He still RPs that his nation is basically 99% irradiated desert hellhole, basically. So some people still stick with it. I, for one, also stick with some of the lore I have from those days, but I think most people don't.
I would like to add that I'm also stuck to the canon of what I've RP'd throughout history, as long as the RP itself has not been decanonized by someone else. I have also tried to stick to what has happened in the past over the past almost 2 years, which does create a continuity, which it can be hard to continue the continuity as people leave and new people join the RP world, since as it is a community run RP, you have continuity problems.
Yes.
Mostly, if we don't, in a way, but we still do. You see, the a continuity problem can be like, if someone did something great, we want to remember them, and can things they have done can be kept canon, but let's say they left the map and someone else is now in the place that they were, it can create this problem where this nation, we do not restrict them to have to make use of the history the former person has had, as that would restrict a person's ability to roleplay. Thus, it does create this strange situation of continuity holes that we are just forced to live with in the end.
Well, I do not exactly remember when we started to make the first 3D. It must yeah, I think it was before we got the official map, but it was at the time we were looking for a map. We were seeing that RMB RP was getting more centralized. We wanted to get more centralization, or however you would like to say it. We want to get things more orderly, since, like I said before, the way things worked before is that people would just do whatever they please. They would just march straight into people's capitals, ignore defenses, ignore anything, just nuke them, just cluster nuke them, just do anything basically. And eventually, a group of people, among which global no something socialist republic,
Global
also,
socialist republics.
yeah, yes, who is better known as the Chavo by some. Then you had, I think, AKE, me, and some other people who just decided to make something we called a summit, basically, that we held in the NS forums, in which we just discussed some ways to deal with people who would constantly God mode and reset button and everything. And after a couple of hours, it just started dying down, and I asked if someone wanted to write it down, and no one really did, so I did it. I basically wrote everything in a fact book, and that's basically where the first treaty came from. And as to how it was enforced, basically, is that me, along with some of the other more prominent RPers of the time, like Paksovska, Sanada, Kyoki, and some others, would just see it as being the thing to make sure things don't go wrong, which is basically how we just enforced it. You followed it, or you could get lost, basically. Yes.
Right, thank you for passing me the word. I am GSP. I am the one of the newest persons here in SR. Well, at least of somewhat importance. And I was the host yesterday in the NBS. I'm not gonna be here 100% of the time, so I'm gonna flicker in and off. But it's an honor joining.
Well, it went slowly over time, but basically from the moment on, everyone wants to be included in the RP, which is why you RP from the start. No one really wants to RP just by themselves, because why else be on NS, right? So, what happened basically is that we just peer pressured them. Basically, that sounds evil, but that's basically what happened. We just didn't allow them to RP with us if they didn't behave. If they just wanted to nuke everyone and just reset everything and not play nice, then, well, why even be there? So we just shut them out if they did. And some people adapted, some people left, and over time it just got less and less. We still have god modus from time to time, but essentially they usually learn pretty quickly.
Yes, it's it's usually a case of that you want, since as Friendly has said, you want to be included, because being excluded is kind of a horrible thing for yourself. Thus, you will rather conform to it, as it allows you to be included. However, of course, there would have perhaps been different ways to approach it, and of course, we chose this way. Oh, and it's how we have evolved to the part of the RP that is a lot more fluent than it was back then, and with the move to the Discord for the administration of the RP itself, the managing it for the moderation team has significantly improved. Thus, you have the ability to more effectively deal with chaotic situations such as god modding and situations such as that.
Yeah, spammers and the kind.
Yeah, as a new person in the SR, I see that really few people are yacht modding today, and the ones that do are probably not even in SR. They're just new people who don't really know what they're doing. So I see that after the all the treaties, things got way better in the RP world.
Yeah. Well, that depends generally. Mostly the way people get involved is that they just see other people RP. They see other people RP and they think like, hey, that looks interesting. I want to join in as well. That because that's basically how I started. In the old days before SR, I saw the reason I'm here is because I saw Kyoki RP with someone, and I thought, hey, that's nice. I'm gonna join in on that, and here we are now.
Yes,
And
pardon me.
yes,
And I can conform to this, as my experience in the reason I joined SR is also because I witnessed someone else RPing and read it and was genuinely interested and wanted to be a part of it, a part of said RP, and I think that's how a lot of people do it.
Yeah, most of people do it like that. It's experience of myself experience. Basically, everyone that's in SR right now saw other people RPing in the RMB. Few were just ignore the RMB and go reading someone else's factbooks until they randomly stumbled upon the Godmo Treaty or Bugzovska's SR.
Well, yes, one of the issues that we are currently facing and that we are engaging in is what we've basically called imperialism. It's that a lot of people like to get bigger, of course. They like to plan, they like to try to win. They don't. There some people don't really see the game as cooperative. They see it as competitive, and they want to win by having the most pixels, aka the most land. And we are currently in progress of fixing this so that it becomes more of a cooperative community, which will make it more fun for everyone.
Yes, but because an RP itself is not meant to be a competitive setting, as then you come back to the point where you are RPing with yourself, and you have courses where if you have it competitive, people will not be friendly. People will become people will no longer be friendly with each other. They will become to start like disliking each other in a way that perhaps not very healthy for the community, which is something we have historically had problems with, which we are really trying to solve. As it is a community that is meant to be meant to assist and cooperate with each other to create content in the form of writing, which should be and is for me the most important part of the RP itself.
Yes.
And it's something that I've been trying to very recently been trying since I became a moderator. That oh shit, that I've been trying to like promote and make people aware of, that it is a role play and not a video game. It's something I oftenly say, and I really hope that we can even further increase the knowledge and the understanding of these aspects to create a better and more friendly community for everyone involved.
Exactly. The way I've lately been um, describing it is that if you want to play a competitive game, if you want to come out as number one, go play Hearts of Iron or something. I mean, that's basically what you're looking for. Why do RP then if you're looking for that? RP is supposed to be a competitive, cooperative thing. It's supposed to be fun for everyone. It's supposed to be fun to write things together, to create a story from nothing, to create content. Yes. Could you
And
repeat the last thing?
you always got to remember that the person can avoid it if they don't want to participate in the invasion or the war or what.
They certainly can, yes. But we do try to encourage people to not just invade people to actually uh, manage to actually speak it through with each other, the results and everything, because that's what makes the best content. Because if you want to win one battle and the other person wants to win as well, you're just gonna get competitive thinking, and you're gonna get competitive writing, and that's not going to be good writing, generally speaking. If you know ahead who's gonna win in which battle and who's going to win in the end, and both have their piece in it and both want to have that result, then that's going to create the best content, because then people can focus on making the best quality on it instead of just winning.
Everything that is written as an RMB RP post on the RMB as a part of SR is canon, unless it breaks nation states rules, TNP rules, or RMB rules. With the exception of if you try to RP with someone and they do not want to partake in the RP and they tell you such, the RP you've written will not, to them will no longer be canon, as they did not want to. They will not take part of it. We call this voiding.
The First World War, or what? Or I mean, the first, yes, like Paxovska says in the microphoneless, the first real World War was the NATO Warsaw Pact War, which was at the very start, well, pretty much at the start of the RP. I think it was in less than a month after we started the RP on the map, which was the most major war. I think it's also the biggest war we've seen so far because of the size of the nations that were on the map at the time. A lot of people see me as being humongous at this time, but if they see other maps, they will see that compared to the nations that were on the map before, I am not even that big actually. And because of that, a lot more of the world was engaged in this conflict. And basically, the conflict itself was the two factions, the Warsaw Pact, which still exists under my leadership at this time, which is an alliance for dictatorships, autocratic nations, and all that kind of thing. And then you had NATO, which was the opposite, being democratic and peaceful and all that kind of thing. And eventually, one of the NATO leaders poisoned one of the Warsaw Pact leaders, and this led to the Warsaw Pact declaring war on NATO, and eventually, after a pretty major war, exterminating NATO. No, it was on the SR map. It's on the SR map itself, the one we have now. Well, you could see it as a kind of Cold War thing. They obviously had Cold War names, being that the Warsaw Pact, of course, is named after the real Warsaw Pact, despite not having any real ties to it. It is not communist in any way, shape, or form. And NATO did also contain a bunch of monarchies. So it's not a complete copy, but basically, yes, it was a Cold War, since compared to the situation we have now with multiple alliances, there were only two alliances. There was Warsaw Pact and there was NATO, and nothing in between, basically. And this made it pretty much a Cold War situation, yes.
Yes. Which also leads me to have to clarify that NATO is not NATO in SR, it was rather N8TO, which when I joined a bit after the Warsaw Pact NATO war had already passed, in where I joined in. Well, I joined TNP in like the last couple of days of July, but I think I only knew about the map until August, which in case that I thought that the SR had been going on for a very long time, and I've thought this for a very long time up until around January of 2018, where I essentially asked how long it had actually been going, and to get to know that it had not been going for much more than a month longer than I had been here. But to go on with what I was saying, well, both of it, in fact. There is a general consensus that alliances both have a positive and a negative effect on the roleplay, as it has a positive effect of that you have a smaller group of people that you can feel that you are more connected to and can RP more freely with, which is a bonus for the community. But at the same time, it can create a division in the community where you have groups of people that may start to not like each other due to being in different groups, which is something we have had problems with, which we have much less problems with nowadays. Which, however, the purpose of the alliances today very, very differently. And it can always be said as that they are essential, almost essential to SR and in the present day, as many of them have been around for just so long that we've come to be defined by it. Well, mostly the latest addition to the SR map was, in the form of a continent, is the Chidokuran Island, owned by Kyoki Chidoku. And as Puksovska is the creator and part of the cartography team and has essentially been in charge of the map for a very long time, there was a rule set that he would not add more continents, as it would not be needed. However, it is to my knowledge, although this happened before I joined the map, as I claimed my own on, I think, map 30, which is a long time ago, when the map in physical form looked like it looks today, basically. However, the continent Fusia, which is the large island-like continent in the southeastern part of the map, was added to the map because they ran out of space. As in the early days, there were no limitations or restrictions on how people would claim their spaces on the map, and thus very few people, which originally were very few consistent RPers on the map, covered up most of the map. Of course, you are free to correct me on this, Friently, as this is kind of beyond my knowledge, in fact. However, this is the impression I have of it.
Yes, that is true. Basically, we ran out of space because of people just claiming things. Like, look, for instance, at the maps that Puksovska and I posted in Microphoneless. You can see me being basically the same size I am now, but look at me compared to nations such as Mintas, Lands of Anarchy, Albi Land, Anti-Yard, AKE, and Slim. I was pretty small compared to them. I am gargantuan now compared to others. That's because they all slinked and I stayed the same, essentially. Same for Puksovska. But the thing is, you can see how big the nations are. There's like around 30, 40 nations, I think, on that map. And that's when we started running out of space. We now, with the claim limits in place, we now currently have 200 or something. Puksovska probably knows how many there are at this time, but my guesstimate is about 200 at this time.
Yes, I'm not quite sure how many. In fact, I know that when I joined, it was very, very few, and I've been told here I joined the map. Well, I was added to the map in map 42, which is a very long time ago, and it was before. It was even before that. Um, it was even before we started having the restrictions on the claim. Because in fact, if I'm not mistaken, and Dubska can correct me on this, there were very, very little space available when I first claimed on the map, which was far before I was actually added to it. There were essentially no space left.
Yeah.
However, since then we've included rules on how much space you are allowed to claim, to the purpose of allowing more people on the map for more people to RP, because more people RPing will always create a more active and fun community than just a couple of people, which, yes, there can also be fun, but without new people, it very quickly will die out if someone decides that they no longer want to take part.
Well, that's basically because the original intention of territory of alliance territory was to prevent border gore. Like, um, let's see, I have an image on my phone somewhere about the original claims of the Minthas War, which was one of the first wars when on the Canon SR map, which basically made tore Minthas in two and set pretty much a example of how not to conquer someone, because it hurt him pretty bad. We took like 99% of his coastal territory, which in hindsight was not a very nice thing to do. I found the image. This is basically what people wanted to do first, at first. And as you can see, it is pretty border gory. Yeah, there's land from people just everywhere that just doesn't belong there. And that is the reason we created alliance territory, so that you could conquer land, but not actually have it divided by people, or at least not yet. So you can figure out a decent uh, dividing instead of just having to do it quickly to get as much land as possible. And over time, that happened. That's what happened with the Warsaw Pact territory. After the Warsaw Pact NATO war, we just took over their NATO territory, which they also got from the Minthas war, which made the Warsaw Pact territory pretty massive. I think even the biggest nation on the map that wasn't even a nation in and of itself. And the reason we removed it was because over time, essentially, it just became, for all intents and purposes, useless. It was a border, and it made the Warsaw Pact look a lot bigger, but it didn't really serve a lot of purpose other than just provide bases and all that. And I felt that that was not really being fair. So me as well as along with some other alliance leaders, such as Vapia himself, decided that it would probably be best to open it up for new nations instead of just keeping it for myself, or instead of just keeping it the way it was. So basically, in the end, it was just done to allow more nations to claim their.
Ah, yes, Inferno
Oh.
Shiver. Oh, geez. I'm going to let Friendly explain this one.
Yes, Inferno Shiver was one of the most infamous god modes we've ever known. That big circle was basically a city, a gigantic city underwater. In his own words, about 11 kilometers underwater. His people were shark people, and he had about 15,000 World War II era Tiger tanks driven by shark people from 11 kilometers deep in the water. And he had about 100,000 battleships or something, is what he claimed. And obviously, this didn't exactly stand well with a lot of the other people, and especially not with the basically the impromptu moderation team, since there wasn't really a moderation team back then. And eventually we just banned him because we RP banned him, and so far he hasn't been back, but we generally hope it stays that way.
Indeed, he was terrible to handle, and it's one of those people that really that eventually was like, we do not want them in the community, that as they were purely a destructive part of the community that didn't provide anything
Yes,
good to the community, which even god modding can provide good things to the community, as if even god modding can be allowed if the other person involved in the situation allows it, as
yes,
it then suddenly become not, it doesn't classify as god modding anymore, as it's agreed upon by the two or more peers.
exactly. But I want to make very clear, in now I'm thinking about it, that it might sound like we just banned him because his RP was bad. And that is not at all the case. We didn't ban him because his RP was bad. We banned him because he was also just a toxic person to deal with. We tried to explain to him why god modding was bad and why he should pick a normal amount of equipment for things, and explain to him how he should most likely take things and do things in a more better way. I mean, we give people a lot of freedom to pick their own things, and we explained that to him. But he essentially stood his ground and he just said, "No, I just want to have my own thing." And when we said that if he was going to be that way, that we wouldn't allow him in, he just became toxic and started shouting at people, and he just started making weird comments and harassing people, and that's essentially when we just had enough and we banned him. Just wanted to make that clear.
It's essentially tied to your nation you have created for RP, and essentially not at all dependent on nation states. Mostly, for the statistics in nation states are very, very inflated in a way that they make absolutely no sense. In fact, they are. In fact, this is what many people who might come in think that they have to do, and it's something that we need. We as especially we as a moderation team, and preferably everybody else as well, needs to actively tell new people that the nation on nation states doesn't represent the nation that they RP as, unless of course they want to base their nation they RP as on the nation state's nation. But the stats themselves we avoid due to the very crazy and inflated nature.
And because of nation state issues just being incredibly inconsistent and in most cases being random, it has more than once occurred that people would answer an issue that should, by every means, increase a certain stat by a lot and have no effect on another stat, and then when they accept that option, it would just not raise or decrease, or just increase it by a incredibly minimal amount, while ridiculously affecting some other stats, such as mostly being seen that if you pick militaristic options, by default your authoritarianism will go up, which it has some base, but it's not a requirement. Yes, yet NS thinks it's a requirement, which is why we do not use any nation state stats for anything basically, except the defense stats for military calculations. But like Sika said before, it's mostly based on what kind of nation you make. We don't force people to identically have the same kind of stats as the nation they RP as. Like some people can have a nation similar to Norway. That doesn't mean they need to have the same population density. That doesn't mean they need to have the same economic output, but it just means that they need to be somewhere in that general area, even to make it at least a little bit realistic, not as to prevent people living basically on the South Pole from having 100 billion population, if you get what I mean. Exactly. The point of SR basically is that we want to give people as much freedom as is possible within reason. They could. I mean, it's discouraged. Well, it's not necessarily discouraged, but it's a bit unoriginal, and that's generally going to be kind of frowned upon if you're going to be that unoriginal. It's not a hard thing, but some people will not really like it if you get what I mean. But it's allowed technically, yes.
Yes, we don't exactly ban or outlaw that like nations inspired by real world nations, but we try to. We don't want them to be clones, as we want something. It would be much better to have something that you have come up with, that you want, and not just something that is just a copy of something else, as it's not, as it won't be feel important. And of course, just it's also strange to RP with, and because, well, we do want people to actually lay some definite effort into their roleplay, and by effectively copying a real world nation, you limit yourself in what you can RP. Because if you say Finland, you are an identical copy of Finland, you will not be able to RP things that Finland would never do, or would not happen in Finland, because you are Finland. And that, in a way, would restrict you by a large degree. And that is not something we would prefer, but of course, being inspired by something of real life is obviously a very, very common thing, because you have to essentially have to have some kind of inspiration, or else you will sit there and don't know what to do.
Exactly.
But inspiration is not the same as just plagiarism, which is an important difference.
Well, that generally depends on the case itself. We don't have a solid line because lines generally tend to be really intrusive or be really hard limits that are usually pretty hard on people. Generally, it's just a case thing, but what what we normally just use is if it's just going if it is an unfair advantage over someone else, then it will generally be seen as god modding, or if it's just not possible. Like, so a fairly obvious thing for god modding is just walking into someone's capital just like that, which is impossible for pretty obvious reasons. First of all, being defended. Second of all, what if your capital is surrounded by a mountain line or something? You can't just walk over that. That kind of thing generally.
Essentially, god modding in such a way is a post that does something that the your fellow RPer cannot, in a proper way, respond to, because his ability to respond has been limited by the fact that you have essentially not giving him the chance to it. Or
Yes.
in god modding, another solid and hard part of god modding is that unless it has been agreed upon beforehand by the 2 or more RPs involved, you may not control or write from the perspective of another RP's characters, as you are then stealing their character, which is not allowed, unless, of course, it has been allowed by the person who created and owns the character. Because
Exactly.
because in situations like the 4th or 5th edition in the chapter Shattered Illusion, I had to take control of Kyoki's character to portray the scene that happened, as my own character fell unconscious, and since my own character was the only character that I had in the situation, I cannot then RP. But then Kyoki had given me permission to control some of his characters to further the story, and that is a situation where such an occurrence is allowed.
Yes. And to expand on this, what is meant with not being able to steal someone else's characters for instance, if you are in a war and you say for instance want to bomb their harbor or something, you can write that you're about to bomb their harbor, but you cannot say how much damage it does, how much people it kills. Your opponent, the person who is affected by it, has to say that themselves.
And of course, both parties in this situation has to be reasonable, because if you, as to continue the example Friently have given with a bombing of a harbor, bombing a harbor is going to cause this destruction and chaos, and thus saying as the receiving end that they did not would technically also be god modding, as that is just not realistic. It just cannot happen. Thus, communication between the two parties in any kind of RP that involves more than one individual
Is key.
is key. A character of another role player, well, it's best described as you have created your set of characters, your set of things that are part of your nation that you have created. They're yours. Someone else may not RP as them. Essentially, it's essentially, think of, I own 2 glasses and Friently owns 2, and I say that Friently's glass is now 4, without technically having ever seen the glass or known about the glass except that it exists. But I cannot know that. It is not mine. I do not have an access to it. I do not know that, and I cannot control it. Thus, that is wrong.
Well, not really. Well, I mean, we do encourage people to world build as much as possible, and I personally usually tell people to world build their nation before they start going into wars, because wars generally tend to be really decisive for people. Due to if they lose, they don't lose anything because they don't have anything world built for their nation, so it doesn't matter. So they usually tend to leave. And if they have something world built, they usually get attached to it. If you have a whole nation world built, if you have characters you spend time on, then you don't want to leave. You want to put in effort because you want to keep going. And if you have nothing, then you don't have anything to lose.
Indeed. And it also ties back to the former question, where if you have a character that you have world built, you have created, you have RP'd with this character a very extensive amount, and you grow attached to this character, you want to keep the character, and thus it creates the situation where someone else will say that they have killed this character, but you don't want this, or they want to do something with this character that you don't want because it is yours. You have become attached to it, and
Exactly.
this thus and thus comes the how everything just ties together, as the world building is very important for the purpose of the RP. Because without the world building, your RP has no purpose. It has nothing to base itself upon. But without the RP itself, the world building becomes pointless. Because if you're just world building without the RP, you're doing it for no reason. And as you do these two things together, you become attached to it. It becomes important for you, and thus you will further improve it.
Exactly.
Yes, because it makes things matter to you. You see, we have lately actually discussed such a possibility, but we believe that restricting that in such a way would be wrong
Counterproductive.
because yes, because it decreases the ability of people to RP what they want. However, we have we have noticed that it becomes a problem, and we would like to see a more world built war. Like if you want to go to war, world build it first. Build it up through RP and world building, like why it occurs. And if you encourage this and really not I don't want to say enforce it, but encourage it and really promote that wars become conflicts where they're built up through sequences of role play and world building between 2, 3, 4, or more people that eventually may unravel into a war. You also come to the situation that the war can be prevented before it happens during the stage where it is built up through RP and world building. And I believe that doing it in such a way would decrease the amount of wars that happens, just through the purpose of that they can be stopped without having to go in out of character and prevent them, as that doesn't really make sense to do. And
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the things that is that also ties back to the previous thing is that world building also helps make wars more qualitative, because world building can be a powerful seal. Names can be a powerful seal. For instance, during the Nightmare War I had with Kyoki, despite me only having named a character mere seconds ago, their death, their horrible death, did affect how you see things. They make you feel things. If people just make it a number generated thing, that like I put 5,000 people in here, they have 4,000 here, therefore I outnumber them, therefore I win, or therefore I will do this. That's something we try to um dis what do you call it? Yes,
discourage.
yes, discourage. Thank you. Because we want to say, we generally want to encourage people to have more in depth, to not RP the numbers, but to RP the people themselves, the people that participate, individuals, instead of just numbers, because that's more fun to write, because it gets you more engaged. Because
Indeed.
it's different for different people, but for me personally, in the Nightmare War I had with Kyoki, I felt really connected to the people I wrote about, because I don't think I have named any numbers in any part of the war, yet I got, and because the way I cooperated with Kyoki in it, when because we spoke through everything, I could just write detailed and RP that I really felt good about. And I'm still really proud of what I wrote because it's more fun to do instead of just having I shove 100,000 people in there, therefore I win because I outnumber them, and that's not fun.
Indeed. And on the same topic, during the beginning of my own RP with Kyoki, which yes, he comes up in a lot of examples here. I created quite a few non-essential characters just to improve the plot, and it becomes to the point where I named them. I gave them personalities, and I gave them reason to exist. And as such, even at the end, like I didn't really want to just leave them be, despite knowing that they would no longer be important in another couple of days, as their only purpose was to forward the purpose. But yet I grew attached to the two character, to the two people living in a small house in the middle of the forest, as they became important. They became people, not just characters. They became actual living people, essentially, by being. They had names. They had a history. They had a purpose. They went to work. They ate. They slept. They had feelings. They had thoughts. All these things that were described for two characters that we were only going to see for a couple of posts and then never hear anything about again. But it creates an environment for the RP and a purpose for everything to exist.
Well, there's no set expectation for how long you want to make a post. I mean, that's for everyone themselves to decide, as everyone has different amounts of inspiration, different amounts of time they can put into it. So it really depends on the person that is writing it. But generally, for myself, I try to go for as big and as detailed as possible. For instance, yesterday I released a post on a new solo RP that I am starting that is going to be about about building a flagship for my navy, and I want to include in that all the details of how to build a flagship, the design, the gathering of the resources, how to get a slipway, how to get everything to the location, how to get everything going, how to build it, where to put it, everything that needs to be done to actually build a ship. Because a lot of people just say, "Oh well, I build a ship," but there's a lot more to it than just that, and that's what I want to put in there. But that first post is almost 1,000 words long, which isn't that much for my usual thing, but even then, it's just an intro post, and in the intro post itself, I had a lot of personal things that the emperor of my nation and his family go through in the time before he makes the decision to actually build it, which is what I personally prefer. But of course, that's different for everyone. Some people may be satisfied with just a couple of words on what happened. Some people may not mention it at all. Some people like to get straight to the point, and some people might get into even more detail than I did. Some people might make a whole book worth of backstory for what happens before they utter the single sentence, "I'm going to do something." So it really depends per person.
Yes, and uh, and the purpose of, as you said, an intro post would be to introduce it and really make both yourself and whoever is going to read it, and perhaps if you are paying with someone else, give the other person something to respond to, as something has to start every single thing. Things don't just appear. So the importance of building up everything that happens within a roleplay post can very quickly make the post extremely large, as we discussed yesterday really happened in the Operation Second roleplay, where the posts, the sheer size of the posts were exhausting, almost, as there was just so many things going on to describe the story that was happening.
Didn't we get the 9,000 in 9,000 words in one post or something? Or didn't we
Yes.
have to make it into different posts because we got over the 10,000 limit? That is on a
Yes, that is actually true. During one of the posts, which portrayed a 2-hour long drive to work, between the port facility that the characters arrived in to the estate which they were going to visit. The post itself contained 10,260 words that essentially portrayed, I think it was 9 people sitting in 3 different cars, conversing with each other. And
exactly.
it really shows the possibility of a post if you really put in effort into it. But every post cannot be that huge. That would essentially kill the RP community, as the posts would be so few and far between. It took us over a month to write it. And it really shows that the effort you put into it really will come clean in not how large the post becomes, but rather how proud you are of writing it. That is always the most important part. Are you satisfied with what you have written? Does it make you feel accomplished? Have you accomplished something? Like, I wrote the post where one of my characters nearly died. It was almost 3,000 words long, and as it was one of my most beloved characters, well, it is my most beloved characters. It really affected me. So it's one of the posts that I am most proud of writing, even though the language I had used in it was decent at best, because I am not a native English speaker, but it's good enough to the point where I feel satisfied and I feel proud of my own accomplishment of writing it. And even if it's 200, even if it's 40, 50 words or 2,000 words, it doesn't matter, as long as you can comfortably portray something occurring.
Yes, and as long as it really makes you proud and happy, it's good.
And the thing that I find important, hey again, by the way,
Yeah,
is
come on.
that many people at RP aren't native English speakers, myself included, Sartania, Friently. Many people don't speak English as a first language, yet they do these massive RP posts with so much detail. It's if you stop and give a time to read it, it's so detailed, so I don't know, intriguing to read, and uh, they English wasn't even the first language they learned, so it's kind of amazing actually.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. And it really shows too, but we don't want to discriminate from it, because people will make mistakes. Nobody is perfect, but we must learn to look past these minor language barrier based mistakes and errors, because they are not the important part. It is what you are trying to convey. I know for myself that I use repeated amounts of words, as my English vocabulary isn't the largest in the world. Thus, I tend to repeat certain words quite a lot, as I do not know what else to use. But that is fine, as long as it portrays the story you're trying to portray, and in the way you want it to be portrayed, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly. One of the problems I myself find, well, one of the things I myself find difficult is that despite my English vocabulary being pretty big, and if I do say so myself, my English is decent at least. I do find some parts of grammar to be a bit difficult, especially building and where to end a sentence. Like if you read my posts, and also generally when I type things, I tend to put a lot of commas in places instead of periods, because I can never really sense when to end a sentence properly, when to give when to put a comma, and when to make an end, when to put a period. That's something I find myself problem with. So a lot of people have different problems with different things, but so far in my entire SR career, I have never really seen anyone complain about any of it or about anyone else, because like GSP said before, there's I think by far most people are non-native English speakers, so most people understand that errors will be made and that therefore it doesn't really matter. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this. Like we had a spammer in a while ago that would purposefully write things wrong. Like it was obvious from their writing they knew how to write, but they just purposefully made it. They just purposely wrote things wrong, and that's of course something different entirely. But overall, most people just don't care about grammar errors because they know themselves how difficult it can be. And that's something I personally really like about this community, is that no one really minds it, no one really complains about it, because everyone knows. Well, that again depends very much on the person. We of course want people to do as much as possible, though I myself am also guilty of not doing a lot or at all of it. I try to do as much as possible and to give uh, at least a decent reason for why I do things. And the problem we are faced with is that a lot of people just do it for no in character reason at all. They just do it because they want to. They have no reason to it. And what we want to encourage is people to actually have a reason to do it. Be it be it something stupid, like the one of their border guards shot one of your citizens, something like that. At least have a reason to it. Have a planning to it. Have something. No, don't have nothing. That's what we want to discourage.
Yes, indeed. I try to discourage these things as much as I can personally, because I really don't. It's something I don't really enjoy reading or writing myself. Of course, spontaneous RPs can always be fun, as I have myself written a fair bit of spontaneous posts about something random, and a sudden occurrence of something in another nation can always just spark people into writing a random themed response post to it based on their own nation's characters' thoughts and feelings of the matter, where it really brings the community to actually really reply to themselves and everybody else without really having a purpose, without really having a part in the RP itself, but rather just offering their own input into the situation, which really helps bring together the community and give the community more of a lifelike feeling, as just because something happens in two nations does not mean nobody else knows about it. In fact, usually most nations will know occurrences in most other nations in the world. Thus,
Oh yes, how many? Well, it's a bit of a difficult thing to say because there's a discussion going on for a while now, but like what qualifies as a world war? Personally, I always say there's been three world wars. There's been Warsaw Pact, NATO, then there has been the imperialistic league for no Excelsior versus Hotel Lala, and then you had the Ocean Punitive War. That's three world wars that actually did happen.
yes, and
The Ocean Punitive War was the most recent one.
indeed, the I share the same consensus with Friently there that classifying a world war in SR where things can happen very strange ways is very hard. So one has to really take the largest and most defining conflict that has happened as world wars instead of just basing it upon the normal real world definition of a world war, which does not really fit into SR due to how the political situations may not, and definitely are not, particularly realistic at many times.
Of course. So
Yeah, makes sense.
if we can answer whatever questions that are still left and satisfy those people their questions, then I think that would be a good ending.
Yeah, so there's one question by.
Well, what I
Oh
would
boy.
change is of course, well, of course, it will. The difference from the start would be that the claim limits would have been entirely different. There wouldn't have been massive nations. Paksovska and me, for instance, would be so much smaller because we'd have so much smaller claims, and things would be a lot different in that part. But of course, what would also be different is that we would have the current rule set instead of the rule set that we've had before, because I've always updated it when necessary. The rule set I have now is entirely different from the first version I had, because over time I have listened to feedback and, of course, seen the things that were needed and the things that were going on, and adapted that into a more better, more fair, more inclusive, more everything way for the treaty to be. So a lot of things that happened in the past that were fine then would not happen now, such as the war with Minthos, the thing that started the whole alliance land thing. That wouldn't happen because of the limits that are currently in place, as well as a lot of the world wars that have happened, such as Warsaw Pact, NATO themselves, would also have occurred so much different due to the difference in rule set. So it would there would be it would overall be different, but it wouldn't be worse or better per se.
In fact, I'd rather say that even having a reset would almost worsen the community because we've been a community for so long that we're defined by what it is and isn't today, that the community would be almost unrecognizable from what it is today, and I'd rather not change that history.
Same. Imagine people that have worked in their nation for years and years and years just suddenly shit I can't years and years and suddenly it's just gone. You resets and now you have to start from scratch. Imagine how frustrating that may be.
Yes, it would be pretty devastating to me, for one. All right, so see, I would like to still answer, but as fast as possible, the question Mike did, which is what alternative RPs there are to imperialistic wars, which is, well, basically anything. Take for instance the thing I'm doing at this point, which is indeed the naval and the flagship RP I'm doing right now, or take basically everything. Well, basically everything else. Have a meeting with someone. Try to have fun. Have something happen in your nation. Have a citizen come up to your leader and ask him to do something. Have just basically anything. Let your imagination run wild. Have fun.
Indeed, and in similarly to Friendly, a while ago, I was planning to do an RP that would both incorporate my own writing and many other people, as I had, funnily enough, read and listened to documentaries on the occurrence of the Great White Fleet of the 1906 and 1907, I think it was, and felt like I wanted to do something inspired by the event. And unfortunately, I eventually recognized that I did not have time to do this, but that is such an event that you can RP practically anything. That can happen, really. You can RP two people eating food if you wish, which I have also done multiple times. It really just comes to show what do you like to RP, what you want to, what can you write.
Stay tuned for.
I think we can save the advertising for just doing it in 50 minutes as planned. Because of course you're welcome to join us then too.
Yes.
Will do.